there's a lot of a dark underbelly in the military culture for kids because they don't have any control over where they live, when they move, what schools they attend. And it's getting to where they are having a difficult time coping with some of those things. And I say all that to say it's not a bad life, but there are really bad days. I think that's probably the most accurate way to describe it, is that there's just some really bad days, you know?
You're listening to Car Seat Questions, a podcast for parents of curious kids. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Eddie. And if you're anything like us, you either have a kid or you care for a kid with questions about all sorts of things.
So, for the next half hour, hop into the passenger seat, buckle your belt, and become childlike with us as the Lord takes us where He wants us to go.
Enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 2 with Car Seat Questions with Megan Brown. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, your family, all that kind of stuff.
Well, my name is Megan. I am a seasoned military spouse. I'm a mother of 4. My husband has been active duty in the United States Air Force for coming up on 20 years. We are so close to retirement family, and we are excited about it. We have lived in 5 different duty stations, 13 different houses, 4 children, 2 dogs, a partridge in a pear tree. It's been excitable. But for the last 10 years, I have served as a military missionary, and I write expository Bible studies and Christian resources for military community members.
Wow. So what does your day-to-day look like being a military missionary?
It is chaos embodied. But really, what I do, we really are passionate about doing 3 things. We are evangelical in nature. There is a large percentage of our military community members that have not yet heard the gospel or don't know how to grasp it. So we do a lot of teaching and sharing the gospel. The next thing that we really focus on is teaching the Bible. If you can imagine moving every 2 to 4 years, we have what we like to call the Franken faith. It is kind of a conglomeration and combination of all the different things that we've picked up from 20 million different churches without any depth. And then finally, what we really focus on is replicating discipleship efforts by training women in our community to become paid and prepared vocational missionaries.
Yeah, and on top of all that, you've also written a couple of books, some of which are with Moody Publishers. Shout out to Moody Publishers. What you signed up for, and the Bible study Summoned. Can you tell us a little bit about those and what the process was like with writing those books?
Absolutely. Summoned was really the result of years on the ground in mission. Being a military missionary, there are hard questions in the military community that are really in need of answers. And what I mean by that is I wrote through the book of Esther because the question it's answering is God good when everything is bad? When everything feels like it's falling apart, when nothing is working, when we're questioning everything, is God's goodness tied directly to our circumstances, or is His faithfulness found somewhere else? I was leading women's Bible studies, and especially in the military community, when there's always bad news, we're either grieving the last thing we lost or preparing to, and suffering long. There was a real need for women in the space to know that God is good in spite of our circumstances, and that His faithfulness isn't found in His provision of a perfect or pleasing life, nor is it found in the prevention of painful things. But ultimately, that book was written so that women could know that His faithfulness is found in the fact that He keeps His promises, and that He promised us Jesus, and Jesus was given.
What have you seen in your ministry with military families is like maybe some of the top 2 or 3 greatest needs that a military family needs to hear about Christ?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that is needed is an evangelical presence. And what I mean by that is an intentional discipleship model and method in the local church. Many of our civilian brothers and sisters don't know exactly what to do with us because we move so often. A lot of times we're treated like perpetual visitors. We need to have someone intentionally sharing the gospel with the men and women in our space, helping us care for our children.
Mm.
We need community in the local church. And ultimately, we need to be shored up and sent out, because if the local
Mm.
church could see who we are and what we're capable of, if they would evangelize us to mission us, we could be mobilized. We could
Yeah.
be the largest mobilized missional force that this generation has seen.
Wow. Yeah, I've never thought about it like that. That's a great point. Can you share with us some things that you've seen God do in the lives of military families or spouses, and even particularly in children, just the lives that you've seen changed?
You know, one of my favorite stories, I got a call from one of our spouses who was attending a small group Bible study. This was years and years ago. And her husband was about to be deployed. And she called and she said, the most beautiful thing has happened. She and her daughters had been coming to some of the studies and getting plugged into church. And while her husband was dragging the big duffel bag to the door, her daughter at the time was 4, and her name was Sophie. And she's like, "Daddy, wait, I have to pray for you." And she grabbed his hand and asked God to keep him safe, to care for their family. It was beautiful. And man, that guy gave his life to the Lord right after that. I mean, it was just immediate. That 4-year-old prayer, man. And so we're seeing that God is in fierce pursuit of the men, women, and children in our space. And we're also finding that the difference between people who are lost, lonely, isolated, longing for answers, and someone who is well and who is saved is a woman with the gospel in our space. And that's really what I do, is I equip women to work in the military space as missionaries.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in the pre-show, but would you be able to give us some insight into a child's experience when their parent is in the military, and have you noticed patterns when it comes to how our kids engage with this and how
Mm.
they interpret that?
You know, I became a military spouse in 2006, and our daughter was born in 2008, and now our children are 15, 13, 11, and 8. They've lived in so many different houses. They've had to rebuild their lives every time we turn around. And in the beginning, the narrative around this particular experience was to spin it as an adventure. All the spouses that came before us, all the women that were, telling us how they did it, it was a lot of positive thought and a lot of
Mm.
pretending.
Oh.
Pretend everything is okay. Don't cry in front of your children. Don't let them know that you're struggling. You've got to be the strong central piece of the home, because, our spouses are always out. And what we're finding 10, 20 years later is that these kids have a lot of frustration, resentment, and grief that they don't know
Mm.
how to process,
Mm.
because they've never been given the space to process it well.
Mm.
When they would say things like, "We don't want to move again," or "Do we have to go now? And does he have to go again?" We would just be like, "Hey, let's focus on, this," or "It's another adventure and it'll be opportunities for us to find new places and do new things." And, looking at the patterns over the last 15 to 20 years, a lot of military children have not learned how to cope well. And we're seeing some
Mm.
pretty concerning and almost staggering statistics, not only in, the anxiety and depression and the things like that, but suicidal ideation and
Mm.
the need for treatment. There's a lot of a dark underbelly in the
Mm.
military culture for kids, because they don't have any control over where
Yeah.
they live, when they move, what schools they attend. And it's getting to where they are having a difficult time coping with some of those things. And I say all that to say it's not a bad life,
Mhm.
but there are really bad days. I think that's probably the most accurate way to describe it, is
Mhm.
that there's just some really bad days.
Yeah. We talk a lot about in this podcast modeling for your children, especially because we currently have a toddler. And a lot at this age is modeling for them how to work through things, work through emotions, and show emotions. And what kind of correlation do you see in the military spouse, needing to also be able to feel those emotions so that their kids can see that they feel them too, and they're not trying to just be strong and whatever, but like, "Yeah, this is hard for me too," as, their spouse or as your mom, "It's hard for me too to go through this."
I think the conversations in the last 5 to 7 years have started to get more healthy.
Mm,
I
Mm.
know that when I became a military spouse in the early 2000s, it was at the height of, the first waves into Iraq and Afghanistan, and the encouragement, if you could even call it that we received was, you need to lock it up because you're
mm,
going to distract him. You're going to get him killed. You can't tell him what's happening. You can't
mm,
share the hard things at home because he's responsible for other people. You've got to get to a place where you can self-sustain. There was a lot of buckle up and pony up, buttercup. You're
mm,
you're in for a ride, but you're gonna have to deal with it. These women, we learn to be hyper self-sufficient.
mhm,
We learn to be very, very stern and strong-willed.
mhm,
But what we're finding specifically for women who are followers of Christ is that they've systematically learned how to harden their own heart,
mm,
and there's a lot of resentment and a lot of regret
Mm.
yeah.
in women in our space.
Do you think that is helpful for the husband who is, like, maybe he's, like, on active duty? Is that actually helpful for them to, like for the wife not to say anything and distract, like,
Oh no.
for the husband? Does the husband
Mm-mm.
actually want that?
I think in some circumstances there are times that it's not ideal to emotionally unload all over your service member.
Sure.
However, when we look at God's design for marriage, that this
Mm,
particular relationship is supposed to be a mirror of the gospel. It's supposed to be a place of
yeah.
mutual benefit,
Mm.
and it's supposed to be grace and peace for both parties.
Mhm,
When one party is responsible for bearing the weight of all the emotional work,
mhm,
it creates different challenges that you pay for later. And what I mean by that is, you may not have any issues in the moment where you're not, unloading and sharing all the hard things that are happening while they're overseas or TDY or, in and out. But when they come home and
mhm,
you have built an entire framework that exists separate from them,
yeah.
Mm.
you pay for it in trying to reintegrate them into a system that was not built with them in mind.
Mm, that's a really good point. Wow. What kind of, there's challenges and I'm sure there's victories in being a military family. What are questions that kids typically have? Maybe for younger kids, elementary school and younger. What kind of questions are they asking of their parents?
One of the most profound ones I heard recently, I was talking to another friend. We were describing kind of our experiences and what we were seeing in our kids. And this child was 4 and said, I'm curious, is it bad for families to not have their dad at home? And my
Mhm,
friend was trying to be honest. And they're like, well, God's design is always that families would be together.
mhm,
And this child looked at her dad and said, well, Daddy, is the military bad because the military has
mhm,
taken you so many different times? And it was one of those things in the moment where you're like, man, that's a heavy question,
yeah.
because it's not a simple answer. Um,
Mhm,
the conversations that I'm having with my children in this season, because I mean, like all military families, we're all walking through hard things, no matter what stage of military service you're in, whether at the beginning, the middle, or closer to the end, there's different challenges at every stage. And I was sitting with my children and I was saying, guys, like this particular hard season, I want you to think about it every time you see the flag waving, every time you hear someone say thank you for all that you do, because I want you to realize that you have a part in this as well. You've paid
mhm,
in, you have
Mm.
sacrificed, you've grown up in a home where your dad wasn't there when you wanted him, you gave up control.
mhm,
And the biggest thing that I'm encouraging our children with in this season is, if we would give what we give for the defense of this great nation, we would move every 2 to 4 years. We would uproot your lives and ours. We would give up church families, communities, career opportunities. If we would do that to support the defense of this country, what would we do for Christ?
mhm,
And if we would do all of that for Christ, how do we feel about the fact that we've made sacrifices for his glory and our good? We can rest in that.
yeah.
We can know that we can do hard things, but it's not hard things for the sake of hard things, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Are there any times where like within your family and your children, do your children look up to like one of their siblings, right? Or is like one of the siblings kind of more of the I don't know, like we go to them because they maybe have a better understanding, or they
Like, are they
uh,
relying on each
yeah,
other?
yeah, is that kind of something that happens within
You
your
know, that
children?
naturally happens, I think, in the military community sometimes, is that the older kids, they step up to the plate because they
Mm.
know. You know, when my husband was deployed in 2019, my son was, he was 9, and he's 13 now. And we lived on base. And if you are familiar with on base housing, it's a vibe, family. Like, there are so many different issues with military housing. So maintenance was out because a sonic boom had blown all of the glass out of the back of our house. I'm standing there cooking dinner, and a sonic boom blows the glass
Oh.
out of the
Wow.
back windows and the screen door, and the sewage line that ran through our, front yard backed up into the house.
No.
Mm.
Yes, yes, it was and it happened 3 days after Dad had boots on the ground somewhere else. It was a
Yeah.
great day. The proverbial fan, so to speak.
Oh
And
my
so,
God.
my son, the maintenance guy arrives, and my son is like, "All right, come on, boss, let me just show you around." And
You're like, "Come
he
on in."
is hilarious. Like, he's walking this grown man through our house, and he's like, "There's the issue. There's the issue. There's the issue. I'm gonna need someone to blah blah blah." And I'm like, "What? What?" He's 9. He's 9, and just the amount and the rate at which they are required to grow up
Mm.
is
Yeah.
is hard. And even now,
Mhm.
helping my son to be able to say, "Look, I'm not doing great, and I would like someone to pay attention to me for a minute."
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
all learn how not to ask for help because we know it's not
Mhm.
coming.
Yeah.
Mm.
And even now, it's something that we're undoing to try and reclaim aspects of their childhood.
Yeah. Do you have to find time to be like, "Hey, just go be a kid," and, like,
Oh,
be
yes.
intentional about that? Because, for us who are not in the military, it's kind of easy, like, "Yeah, go be a kid, whatever." But for children who are in military families and have more responsibilities and a family that they, need to take part in, like, how do you teach your kids and other military kids and other military moms, "Hey, it's okay to just, like, be a kid today or for this hour or for whatever. Just go do kid stuff."
One of the things that we think is really important as a family, like, we really hold fast, like Acts 2:42 through 47 is just burned in my brain. Being devoted to the apostles' teaching, fellowship, prayer, breaking of bread, corporate worship,
Mhm.
right? Like, we say as a family, these are the things that we're dedicated to. And when we think about, all these believers having everything in common, we made our home headquarters. We made our home the centerpiece of community. And the way that I taught the kids, like, we're not friends with one person, we're friends with whole families,
Mm,
because there are
Mm.
other moms out there that need support.
yeah.
There are other kids that need support. And we tend to do life better together. And
Mhm.
so we made Bible study at our home kind of a pillar, corporate worship on Sundays, a pillar. And we, jokingly made the rule that if you don't go to church with us, you don't get to eat. And we would have a, big barbecue in the backyard after. And, my husband is kind of like a pit boss. And so there was a convoy leaving our military housing every Sunday because they wanted some ribs, but they were going to get Jesus first. And so, like, we really were intentional about creating the space in community for our children to have moments where they could
Mhm.
rest because there were other kids and other fun things to do, and that they weren't responsible for anything. Like,
Yeah.
it was an intentional build.
Mhm. Why do you think that the work of military missions is so important for this generation?
I think that one of the greatest evangelical opportunities lies within the military community.
Mm,
If you think about the fact that we move every 2 to 4 years, we're master community builders because we have to be. We suffer well. We do it often. If we thought about the fact that there are over 475, or I think it's 410 installations worldwide engaging with over 80 nations, we could be mobilized.
Yeah.
If we were mobilized on mission for the gospel, we would see revival that would be immeasurable. And in order for that to happen, we need to evangelize this community first. We all married into a community of people that run toward things. And those people who run toward things, there should be an urgency to get the gospel to them. And a friend of mine says it this way when he studied Acts. He's like, the military has always carried the gospel. If you read the book of Acts, you'll see that the Roman military carried it to the known world. And I think it's important for this generation to see the potential of evangelizing this space, because I really think that the Lord is calling us to make disciples with an urgency now.
What would be a word of encouragement you would have for kids of military families?
I think I would encourage moms of military kids, both moms whose grown children are in the military community and moms whose children are still in the car seat, to be really honest about the sacrifice, to be brave and ask for help, and to really have a good finger on the pulse of what your children need, because we're barely tracking basic needs. They have to eat 3 times a day. And if you have teenagers, it's nonstop. They eat all day. The regular running of the house and all of the challenges that come with that. Sometimes, and I mean all the time, military moms are always in crisis mode and they are always in survival mode. And their needs have been put on the very bottom of the list. And so my encouragement would be, have conversations with your younger children and study and observe how they deal with disappointment, which they will experience a lot. Notice what brings them joy and rest, and make an intentional effort to minister to your kids, because they are hurting in ways that they probably couldn't describe. Yeah. And to be honest about how the hardship affects you too. It doesn't do anybody good to throw on, positivity and pretend.
Yeah. And it's hard taking the time to even learn each kid who's going to deal with it differently.
Amen.
And how their emotions, their temperament and how they're wired, how they deal with it differently. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us. This has been really encouraging for me. I have never thought about the potential of military families being such a pivotal part of our evangelism. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I have such a different perspective on that now. And I'm really excited to continue thinking about that and sharing that with others. And I think a lot of people will be encouraged from our conversation today. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah. We typically close with a liturgy. So Eddie will lead us in a closing liturgy just for parents and kids.
Yep, so if you would join us in that, Megan, that'd be great. To him who is able to do far more than we can understand, may he give us the wisdom to raise our children to first love God above all else and to love others as themselves. Go in peace.
Amen. And thank you to the listener for joining us this week. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. But only 5-star reviews is what we want. And comments, because that helps us. So episodes drop every Wednesday, so be sure to check your feed every Wednesday. Thanks. Oh my gosh, the waves, Eddie, please.
Double waves, baby.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Car Seat Questions podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and just let us know what you thought.
Be sure to follow us on YouTube, wherever you find your podcasts, Instagram, TikTok, basically anywhere, and drop your comments below about what you thought about the episode.